instead of just focusing on any given part of that funnel, our responsibility encompasses the entire user funnel, which is great because then we're always focused on ensuring we're driving the right quality of users that are ultimately going to lead to our best lifetime value.
Welcome to Mobile Growth and Pancakes, a podcast by StoreMaven. We break down how and why mobile apps grow. In each episode, we invite a mobile growth expert onto the show to break down a specific mobile growth strategy, how it worked, why it worked, and what they would do differently. I'm your host, Esther Schatz. I have with me today Lomit Patel, who's the Vice President of Growth at IMVU. It would be great if you could just introduce yourself real quick to the audience.
Yeah. Hi, Esther. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Just to let everybody know, my name's Lomit Patel. I head up growth at IMVU, which is the world's largest avatar-based social network app. So it's like a role-playing game where people create avatars and create these virtual worlds where they can meet people from all around the world. So it's really popular, and we have millions of users that play on our game today. We've been growing rapidly before, but the shelter in place has definitely helped us. We've seen an abundance growth, especially on the organic side, and primarily, us, like a lot of other like social and gaming apps, provides people an outlet, right, to pass time. But with our game, it's more about continuing to have that human connection, right? So it's been doing really well, fortunately.
Always good to have some good news in times like this.
Yeah.
I'd also love to understand, when you talk about growth, what are the key KPIs that you're looking for? What sort of metrics do you define as growth?
That is a really good question. When it comes to true growth teams, you can't really work with vanity metrics, right? So for us, the two metrics we're always optimizing towards is our ROAS and cost to acquire a customer.
And just to give us a little bit of sense of, what kind of scale we're looking at, can you give a ballpark range on the kind of MAUs, DAUs, something like that, number of installs, just to give us an idea of what we're looking at?
I mean, total, IMVU's been around like 16 years, and we've had probably north of like 250 million registered users. But currently, in terms of MAUs, we're probably north of 7 million a month right now. In terms of installs, I would say, we don't really actually, we don't really focus on installs like maybe some folks do. We're always optimizing towards downstream events, and primarily the events being new payers and revenue. But in general, we're getting, in terms of budget, we're spending, depending on seasonality, it could be like, millions or several millions a month. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I kind of want to jump right in. You are, I'd say, quite a recognized expert when it comes to AI and growth through AI. And I'd love if you could talk us through what that means a little bit, how this strategy actually works for you, how you utilize it day to day.
I mean, for us, the exciting thing about working in growth is that, the company's really looking to us to drive growth forward. And the way we define growth is, my team is responsible for the entire customer journey. So it's from user acquisition to retention to monetization. Instead of just focusing on any given part of that funnel, our responsibility encompasses the entire user funnel, which is great because then we're always focused on ensuring we're driving the right quality of users that are ultimately going to lead to our best lifetime value customers.
That's such an important point. I think you see it a lot in companies where you silo off different departments. So you have one person who's responsible for bringing in the traffic, and they're measured on typical UA KPIs, and then you have somebody else who's working on optimizing for in-game. And every step along the way, we have if you're looking for different KPIs and you're focused on different things, you don't have that communication to say, hey, we're great. You brought in incredible users through this campaign, but none of them are doing anything for us within the app. So yeah, amazing that you guys are looking at it in the more holistic way.
I would add what you said is really important because I've kind of seen kind of the benefits and the downsides of just having different teams sort of focusing on different areas. I think ultimately, when it comes to growth, it's really good to have one team that's actually responsible for the entire metrics. That doesn't mean that the entire team is going to be able to execute across the board, but they have to kind of become the Sherpa who's basically managing on prioritizing how the other teams end up supporting them to try and achieve those growth metrics.
So can you talk us through how does it look when you have, what does it mean practically, this cross down the funnel full optimization?
So what it means is that, the conversations can be a lot easier or harder depending on how your numbers are going. But for us, what it means is ultimately we have a pretty big say when it comes to having a seat at the table. Every year when the business is setting goals as far as, hey, what's going to be our revenue target? How much are we going to grow? How does a product roadmap need to be influenced to support that growth? My team has a pretty good say, not only on the strategic side of how the business needs to be going, but also in terms of on the execution and tactical side, in terms of how the other teams ultimately end up setting goals that ladder up to supporting the overall growth goal, which I think is really important.
Is there a specific strategy that you were, specifically proud of that you and your team have put in place?
So what I would say, there's obviously different strategies that work for different businesses when it comes to growth. And, the best strategy is always a balance of user acquisition and retention. You don't really want to just focus on one and neglect the other part of that. What I'm proud of is the fact that we've always had, and I guess it really comes down to how we've measured success and responsibilities that we encompass, which is the entire user journey, which means that we get to focus on both of those sides. And the way we've been able to do that has been different from the way I've previously done it at other companies, because I've managed growth for over 20 years at a number of different startups, is that over here, I've been here coming up to about 4 years now. One of the things that excited me about joining IMVU was I joined them at a point where growth was actually going in the wrong direction, because it used to be like a desktop app. When I joined, that's when they were sort of moving into mobile, but they never really spent much money. So for the most part, there was a lot of skeptics about whether mobile was going to work or not. And so the good and the bad side of that was that I was coming into a situation where nobody really believed that mobile was going to really save the business. But at the same time, what I knew was that MVU had a lot of great user data. We get a lot of user data. In mobile, we don't get a lot of time. People's user attention is somewhat shorter, so you have to be able to react in real time. And the way that they was doing user acquisition before was the typical way where you kind of have a bunch of analysts, data scientists, and you kind of use spreadsheets, download data, look at what's going on, and then go back and do these manual changes across different ad exchanges and partners. But long story short, they weren't reacting in real time. So the strategy that I ended up implementing was really helping to implement AI and automation into how that role would fit into growth for us. And so it was all about being really leveraging the digital tech platforms that were potentially out there, and figuring out how we could sort of put a couple of platforms together and make AI work for us. An example being AppsFlyer is our mobile measurement partner. I mean, for the most part, MVU had a culture of trying to build everything, and I said, no, we don't want to build our own mobile measurement attribution system for mobile. So we brought AppsFlyer in for that. The other part of that was, we worked with Leanplan to do a lot of our automation and CRM. And then we ended up creating our own customer data platform where we were able to integrate all of our data across mobile and desktop into one place. And we have a unique identifier, so it's easier for us to track the cross-platform usage with unique customer IDs and unique email addresses. And so now that we were getting this data, the way we ended up growing mobile was because I had relationships with a lot of these partners like Google and Facebook, and we were able to work really early with Snapchat before anybody was really advertising. We were like one of the beta partners to help them figure out how advertising worked 4 years ago. People talk about TikTok now. We were working with TikTok over 2 years ago, helping them to figure out how they were going to monetize all these users. So I would say, one of our secret powers has been to partner with companies in the alpha and beta stages where they're trying to figure out different ad models, and like Google UAC, everybody uses it now, but we were using it way back. But the long story short was, I've always been a big proponent of artificial intelligence, and I had the ability to really implement it here at MView. But the way I was able to implement it was to really learn how these other AI systems work across different partners. Because by being as part of the alphas and betas with Facebook and with Google and with all of these different ad networks that or DSPs that had AI implemented in some way, shape, and form, I really came to really understand, what were the data events that really mattered? How were they really, leveraging AI or machine learning to try and optimize their algorithms to try and drive scale? And what I came to realize was ultimately, and this is good because every business has to do what's best for them. Their algorithms were set up to try and help advertisers be successful in their platform, but it was done in silos because they had never had a holistic view into how they really compared to Google. They never had an idea how it compared to Facebook. It had an idea how Google compared to other campaigns we were running in Google, but it never had the holistic view. And so what we ended up doing was to try and build a layer that really sat between us and all these different partners where we were spending money. So with that AI intelligent machine that we ended up leveraging was ultimately using real-time data signals, which is the same signals all these other machines work on. But instead of looking at it in silos, it was looking at it holistically, and it was basically making decisions in real time around bids, budgets, and creatives to really figure out how much we should be paying at any given time across all these different ad partners, because every ad partner is an ad exchange at the end of the day. And the way I got that inspiration was really studying the finance industry and looking at how trading desks work, because ultimately they have to buy and sell. If you're a trader, you can't just make money when the market's going up. You got to be able to buy and sell and make monies on the margins. And that's the way I see how sophisticated paid user acquisition folks work. The only difference being is that you were kind of given fixed budgets to different partners when you could have more fluidity by having it more flexible, because at any given time certain partners and exchanges are going to be more efficient just based on supply and demand. And that, I would say, was the secret sauce that for our strategy, which was to really be agile in terms of how we were allocating budgets. And we were optimizing ultimately towards a lifetime value user. So we were getting all of this data, and on that data we were making predictions on how much any given user from any given campaign was really worth to us based on where they were coming from.
That's amazing. I think, first of all, I love the finance analogy because it's so true. You set specific budgets for Facebook and you set specific budgets even on a campaign level, forget even on a platform level. And it's very hard to react. Nobody reacts to that real time. You can't do it on a human level. It's just too difficult. That's awesome. I'm curious, when you switch over to the role of AI, obviously the role of somebody who's in charge of user acquisition and somebody who's traditionally been involved in growth in UA, their position has to inevitably change. What does that look like when you're not actively managing the bids and actively reviewing your campaigns in that way?
The good and bad is, and I'm not sure if other people have run into this problem, but living in San Francisco, especially when the economy was great, obviously it's a little challenging right now. It's really hard to hold on to folks that are really working in user acquisition. Ironically, most of my best user acquisition folks were getting poached by Google and Facebook, right? After, they were getting trained on how to do the work. The good and bad part is, people at that level are generally going to move jobs for like $10,000, give and take, even though they don't realize, half of that ends up going back into taxes anyway.
Yep. Yes, the secret of the raise. It only gives you a little bit more.
That's right. That's right. But yeah, so basically, one of the things when I started, I had a much bigger team. But what I ended up doing was once I started transitioning to AI, I started bringing in the right types of people that would really be able to embrace this and not fight this, because that's half the battle. Is you got to bring people in that because for this technology to work, I had to bring in people that were able to think strategically and were able to not want to be getting in and doing all the manual tasks and processes around analyzing data, download, and wanting to go and change and turn the dials. I wanted people to set the machine up to do a lot of that work. And in order to do that, we had to make sure, for example, one person has to be really smart around data, because ultimately you need someone to kind of look at the algorithms and make sure there's no biases or anything like that happening in that we're not over indexing, or we're so obsessed on on optimizing towards an outcome where we end up driving, you know, users that look good in the short term but not good in the long term. So I try to hire one person that was really strong on the data side. I hired one person who was really strong on the creative side, because we ultimately ended up building a creative team in house, because creative testing became a big facet of how a machine works. Because part of it isn't just finding the right users at the right price. It's also getting much smarter around personalization in terms of what's the right message that would stand out for us versus our competitors. So a lot of that really comes from increasing the iterations of creative testing. To give you an example, any given month we're probably testing around 5 to 10,000 different variations of creative. But a lot of that really comes from like creating videos in static. With static, generally we create templates where we have feeds that are changing different call to action, headlines, and images in real time based on who our AI is trying to target. And then with videos, it's a little bit harder to sort of change in videos. So we're sort of changing different themes around different videos and passing that data back to our creative team to really use that data to come up with new iterations of creatives that we continue to keep feeding into the machine. And then ultimately having people that are strong on the soft skills like communications, leadership, relation building, because a big part of our people on my team excel with machine can't is really reaching out to different partners, for example Google and Facebook, and ensuring we have those relations in place so we can continue to get into their different beta programs that are out there, as well as identifying new channels for us to be testing. And internally, we have to continue to champion what we're doing so that other teams continue to support us on what we need. Because a big part of that is, making changes in the product, making sure that, our data doesn't break. Because as you know, every time there's SDK updates that happen with partners, that can generally happen if you don't overlook that. So ensuring that there's really good checks and balances along the whole process, that into all the different systems that go into supporting AI intelligent machine.
Yeah, that's wow, it's amazing. But also, you touched on a point that I'm super interested in, which is you do have these algorithm changes or platform updates or what have you that some may be a little bit more minor, some more major. Obviously, I'm thinking about Apple's announcement about the IDFA, and I would imagine it has a pretty extreme effect on everyone. Have you thought at all about how to accommodate that? How do you have an AI at such a scale that you guys have it at, not fall prey to these kinds of changes?
What Apple announced shouldn't have really been a surprise to people, primarily because they already have been talking a lot about user privacy for a while. That's kind of been part of a position that they've taken. And they introduced limited ad tracking. I believe it was probably like September 2019, but it was about a year ago. I can tell you what we've did on our end, because one of the things I try to do is always plan 12 to 18 months ahead, and then try to anticipate worst case scenario, and sort of plan for that. A good example is, I, like most people, never saw this COVID-19 thing coming. I mean, this has been a crazy
Yeah.
this has been a crazy disaster, and unfortunately impacted a lot of people in a lot of negative ways. But what I did plan for was like 2 years ago, that there was a recession that was going to come, because ultimately, the stock market, yeah, I, I mean, I've been around long enough to live through a couple of recessions, and I know what goes up ultimately has to come down and correct itself. And so that's where our AI really helped us, because back in March, when a lot of the shelter in place started to take place, because we have a machine that does a lot of these, is automated in terms of how it allocates and optimizes our campaigns. When the costs started to come down naturally, with a lot of advertisers pulling out, a machine just started to scale up a spend, because for the most part we have an open budget as long as we're hitting our ROAS and our cost to acquire customer goals. And so that was one example where humanly we might have taken a different approach, and sort of step back and maybe lost the opportunity. But we were able to acquire, we were able to spend like 60-70% more efficient, more budget during the last,
Oh, wow.
in Q2. And what happened was, ultimately we were kind of front loading our second half of the year budget into Q2, because things were so much more efficient for us to acquire users.
Competition went down so significantly.
Yeah. And the other thing that we did preparing for Apple, we didn't know when they were going to make this announcement, but we wanted to make Android to become, an important business for us as well. And because generally iOS obviously has the best quality users for us. So we always try to prioritize feature updates on iOS versus Android. So there was a bit of a gap between feature parity between those two platforms. But in the last 12 months, we hired more people on the Android side to try and close the gap on feature parity, primarily because Android app at the time was lacking a lot of the retention and the monetization options that our iOS had. And so, we had that in place, and that's really helped us to continue to spend more on Android. And so, as a result of what's happening right now, one thing that's going to happen that we know, because our machine is so highly dependent on ROAS data, and a lot of that, the benefit right now is, with iOS, it's all based on deterministic data, because with an IDFA you can really identify who is coming from where and how much they're spending. So what we've started to do now is work on more probabilistic models based on AppsFlyer data, as well as work on web to app data, because we have cross-platform usage. And the third thing we're starting to work on is try to build some more media mix models so that we can leverage some more kind of indirect data signals to try and figure out how to attribute for iOS. Because iOS is going to get challenged, because if we don't get that real-time data, it's going to sort of challenge us. So one way to mitigate that is our machine's naturally going to spend more on Android, because that's I don't anticipate Google making any changes this year anyway.
Not, yeah, not for a year
No,
at
yeah,
least.
yeah. But what I will say, the big difference between Google and Apple is that Google's business is highly dependent on advertising, right? That's their core. Well, Apple's business isn't dependent on advertising, so they can take, a different approach to how they want to be positioned in the industry. Apple's business is based on service. I mean, services is becoming a big part of their revenue. If they completely cut the legs of advertisers to grow their apps, that's going to indirectly impact their share price down the road. I'm a proud Apple shareholder, and I know ultimately, companies need to find a balance of, what's the right thing to do, but what's right for the business. I feel if people haven't done this, but more people are going to start focusing on Android, or at least try to figure out how to monetize users better on Android. And then beyond that, try to figure out with other data signals, and it's going to be more probabilistic than deterministic, to really figure out how that can come into play. One other option I know a lot of people are talking about is the SDK ad network. Between you and me, at least from what I understand on that, I don't think that would really work well for us from an AI perspective, primarily because we rely on real-time data signals, and that's not real time. And then the second part of that is, I think it's kind of limited to maybe like 100 campaigns, and we're running like tens of thousands of campaigns. So do we need to cherry pick, like, which of the 100 campaigns that we want to? So I feel ultimately it's going to be, it's like any puzzle, which is what I enjoy about our
Yeah.
industry, because there's never a dull moment. There's always some curveballs that are being thrown at us, right, to keep us on our toes. So, right now it's a matter of taking a couple of different pieces and trying to figure out before that announcement happens. And even when that announcement comes into play near the end of September, I think it's generally still going to take, a couple of months before more people are going to sort of, upgrade to that. So, it will give us enough time to really figure out, the right way and the right model to attribute for it. But it's not going to be completely accurate. But that's where AI is really helpful, because it kind of helps you ultimately refine your algorithms to work on data where it's not going to be like 100% accurate, but you need to figure out what risk are you willing to live with, like 60-70% accuracy, to make those decisions.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I feel like, in our industry there's always going to be some level of inaccuracy. Even ROAS as a metric, it's such a hard metric to figure out how to calculate, because you can't look at a user's entire lifespan and take that and call it. You have to make some level of sacrifice, and it sounds like you're ready for Apple to bring it on, and you've got you've got your steps planned out, so that's great. I have one last question about kind of your AI and the strategy at IMVU, which is, let's say you could flash back 4 years. start doing it all over again, you're faced with that same challenge, growth is going in the opposite direction, you're trying to move to mobile. Is there anything you do differently?
I would say, I mean, for the most part, what we've done has worked out well for us. What I would do differently is instead of creating that huge gap between iOS and Android, because our apps ended up becoming the feature difference was pretty significant at any given point because we were just focused on like one app at the expense of the other, and ideally don't want to be in a situation where that happens because I mean we're fortunate that we started to prioritize Android early enough, but imagine folks that haven't right now, and that's going to cause a sea shift in terms of how they allocate and hire resources to try and get their Android app up. So I think you know the key thing is, and we've done this pretty well, I would say, for the most part, is always try to have a diverse approach to whatever you're doing. Don't be reliant on any given channel, any given partner, or any given like employee, because ultimately those things can shift or change at any given time. And if you're so highly dependent on that one wearable, then it can kind of put you into a tailspin. So try to be broadly diverse as much as possible. Don't be highly dependent on just working on Google or Facebook. Try to diversify your user acquisition channels. Don't try to just focus on UA. Try to focus on retention, because ultimately it's not about how many you bring in, it's about how many you keep. And then the third part, and I know more people are doing this, is identify the right key metrics that really drive long-term success. Registrations sound nice, millions of installs could be cool, but ultimately what does that mean for revenue, and what does it mean for paying customers?
No, 100%. Very well said. Okay, I'm going to finish you off now with our quick fire round. Quick questions that we ask everyone. The first one, yeah, you ready?
I'm ready, as long as I don't get shot down if I get it wrong.
It's not a pop quiz, but we'll see what happens.
Okay.
If you could give just one tip to an aspiring growth marketer, what would it be?
I would say know your numbers.
Your favorite mobile growth resource?
I would say I mean, obviously, I love reading about different ad tech solutions that are out there. But the other thing is just continue to read as much as possible in the industry, because things are changing so much. I would encourage people to listen to this podcast, but listen to different podcasts that are out there, because it's really funny. You could listen to the same people talking about the same thing with 20 different opinions, but ultimately, the broader knowledge you get on any given topic by reading around it and studying around it, the more you're able to develop your own point of view on it.
Who is the person in mobile growth that you would most want to take out for lunch and why?
I would say I love to take everyone out. I love going to conferences. Right now, the thing I miss the most is just being stuck at home for the most part. So if anybody wants to go to lunch with me, I would love to do it.
It's an open invitation.
It's an
Anybody
open
can take it
invitation.
now.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know about you, but I'm tired of these Zoom lunches, right?
They don't compare. They really don't compare. Okay, and it's on topic, and it's our most important question. What is your favorite flavor of pancake?
I'll be honest, I'm not a big pancake, but
Ooh.
but but I will say that I have kids, so I do know about pancakes, and it's normally like chocolate chip.
Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. That was awesome. And for people who want to find out more about you, your thoughts, learn more, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm very active on LinkedIn. So anybody who reaches out to me, I'm happy to connect with folks. I'm always posting a lot of stuff about what I'm reading and what I'm learning in the industry. So on LinkedIn, Lomit Patel. I also have a blog where I write more articles. So my blog's really easy too. It's pretty much my name, lomitpatel.com. And then, if anybody's interested in the book that, I published recently, that's available on Amazon. So Lean In, I definitely check that out. For me, I just love being part of this industry because things are always moving and changing. And the one thing that's constant is just the relationships you build, right? So you always want to continue to nurture and give back, because I wouldn't be here without other people giving me time to learn and grow as well.
Lomit, thank you so much. That was incredible. I learned a lot.
Thanks for having me. Yes, I'm really excited to be one of the early ones on this show, and I know it's going to be extremely popular. So I'll be listening in and cheering you on.
Thank you. Thank you so much. All right, stay safe.
You too.
And that was Mobile Growth and Pancakes. To find out more about StoreMaven and how we can improve App Store performance, visit storemaven.com. And then make sure to search for Mobile Growth and Pancakes in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at StoreMaven, thanks for listening.